happened? Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history. Make America great again. How can you be against it?
Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Rhonda Colvin, alongside Washington Post columnist and editorial writer James Hohmann and JM Rieger, our senior video journalist. Thank you guys for being here. We also have with us our media reporter, Jeremy Barr. Today, we're going to dive into 2 topics. We'll start with how the second Trump administration has a new, maybe surprising, maybe not so surprising relationship with the media and press access, and what the Gulf of America has to do with it. And second, we're going to talk about confirmations. They are rolling along in the Senate. We'll talk about how some of the more controversial picks have seemingly gone through with no real big upsets so far and what that means. But first, we're going to dive into this discussion about Trump and the media. So we want to bring in our colleague, Jeremy Barr, who covers the media for the Washington Post. Let's start this off with a tape, if we can.
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is.
Okay, so that's one of the moments that has been making some news. So far, since being in office, we've seen from the Trump administration that they have barred the Associated Press from the Oval Office over the Gulf of Mexico versus Gulf of America style guidance. We've also seen the Pentagon remove media such as CNN, New York Times, as well as the Washington Post from workspaces within the Pentagon and replace them with conservative media. And then there's also a lawsuit against CBS from Trump, as well as Twitter also giving Trump a payout as well. So we're going to talk about all of that right now with Jeremy Barr. Jeremy, first with the Gulf of America and the situation with the Associated Press. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why that matters?
Sure. So on January 20th, Trump signed his executive order officially changing the name or directing Secretary of the Interior to change the name to Gulf of America. 3 days later, the AP put out a guidance on that, basically saying that they were going to continue referring to it primarily as the Gulf of Mexico because the name is not recognized outside of the United States. So they didn't want to, confuse their international readers because the AP is obviously the guidance is used around the world and the copy travels widely. But they did say that they would reference Gulf of America as well. They didn't say they wouldn't use the term at all. So that was put out January 23rd. Then we kind of didn't hear about it for a while. And then all of a sudden, it was 2 days ago, was when the AP was told that if they didn't change the style guidance, essentially, they would get barred from events. And then a few hours later, that did happen when a White House reporter, Chris McGarrian, got barred from an event. And then it happened later in the day at a diplomatic room event. The reporter was not let in. And then yesterday it happened again. So we're on day 3, potentially. We're waiting to see what happens today on it, but there's no indication that the White House is going to change course. They obviously doubled down during the briefing yesterday and, very much rejected a question that Caitlin Collins asked where she said, why isn't this retaliation, and defended why it isn't and how it's a privilege to go into the Oval Office. So we're kind of in a stalemate right now, and I have no idea how it's going to end, but it's a pretty big deal, I think.
So there was that instance. And then also at the Pentagon, we saw them remove legacy media from workspaces that they've held for a while. We covered Trump back in his first term as well. We saw the relationship he had, the combative relationship he had with media. But this feels a little different because these are actually actions being taken that result in access to these government officials or these agencies. What was your take, Jeremy, on how this feels different from the last Trump administration and the way that they treated media? Is it different?
Yeah, I think so. It's a lot more multifaceted. I wrote a story today about the FCC, which keeps launching investigations into various media companies. You have the lawsuit, the CBS case. There's a lot of ongoing lawsuits. You have the DOD, as you mentioned, and it's hard to say exactly why they made that change to the DOD. They said it was because they wanted to rotate in more non-traditional outlets, but a lot of people connected that a bit to some of the reporting on Pete Hegseth. NBC News, for example, did a big story about colleagues at Fox News who said that he had an issue with alcohol. So I think there's the stated reason for it. Then there's the analysis of why maybe this is more than what it seems. Obviously, as a reporter, I'm kind of like hinting at that without saying it. But I think people are connecting the two. It's very noticeable, the trend from legacy media to conservative media in terms of, who the change out was. So it seems pretty obvious what's going on, but they're just doing things at every agency across every level, regulatory, legal, moving workspaces, which is a big deal to these TV networks because they really need to have all their cameras and everything in a certain spot. And it's going to really mess up their processes. So, the TV networks are all issuing statements about how they're going to, continue reporting, which is what every media company certainly says. They're not going to give up, but they know that it's a big logistical hurdle and they're not happy with it, obviously.
Yeah, Jeremy, that's what I was going to ask you next is how are the companies and news organizations pushing up against this? Are they doing anything? Are they strategizing together, perhaps?
It's really hard to say what happens, the back channeling that happens. I'm not really sure. I know the New York Times released a statement about this AP matter. You had people like Jake Tapper on CNN say that it was a terrible precedent to set. Caitlin Collins was the one who asked the question about it. I think there was a comment made last night by the AP that implied that they potentially could, take legal action here to try to stop this. They said it was like a constitutional, violation. And this happened a few years ago with the Jim Acosta press pass gate, when the White House took away Jim's press pass because of a question he asked Trump at a press briefing. CNN sued the White House. Then there was a restraining order and basically they had to give him back his press pass. So the press pass matter is actually litigated and there's a precedent that you can't take away press passes. But this is like a little bit different. I don't think there is a legal precedent here. So I do think the AP is not going to accept this. They're not going to back down. Most likely, I think that the current conventional wisdom is that they're going to do some sort of lawsuit or some sort of legal action there.
James, there's also this CBS suit where Trump is suing CBS, home of 60 Minutes, over the Kamala Harris interview that they did during the election season. What are we making of that, and why is Trump suing them?
Well, Trump has been cashing in on a lot of lawsuits that he filed that were laughed at when he filed them. After January 6th, he was kicked off all the social media, the big main traditional social media platforms for inciting violence on that day of the insurrection. And Facebook has paid him $22 million basically to settle that suit. Mark Zuckerberg trying to get back on good terms. And then just yesterday, my wife at the Wall Street Journal, Annie Linsky, scooped that Elon Musk's ex had paid $10 million to settle a suit with Trump that he had filed for getting kicked off of Twitter. Elon had restored him. The original suit was filed against Jack Dorsey. Unlike the other money, this money is not going to the presidential library. This money is going to Donald Trump himself. So that's pretty striking. The CBS suit is really interesting, though. Obviously, ABC News settles for $15 million a lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos for saying that Trump had been found liable for rape, which wasn't quite right. It could have been parsed, but ABC admitted wrongdoing, gave the money to Trump's presidential library. The CBS suit, it's a consumer protection law in Texas. They're not bringing this, they're trying to say it has nothing to do with the First Amendment. They're basically saying consumers were misinformed about how bad Kamala Harris was. This is their argument, because she uses word salad and they edited this interview she did with 60 Minutes to make her answer cleaner and clearer. CBS released the footage of the whole interview, the raw footage, and it showed basically pretty standard journalistic editing. But what's really going on here, and it's important, is Trump believes that he can get up to $100 million out of CBS. His son, Don Jr., is part of the negotiating team. So I think the way to look at what's going on is it is essentially a shakedown by Trump to get money for himself. And he is using the levers of government to do that. I think it is pretty scandalous.
And Jeremy, last question to you. When it comes to, of course, we've talked about the agencies and press access, but when it comes to the CBS suit, why is that concerning? Why is that something to watch?
I think it's really difficult because this is a bit like, there's all these different factors at play right now with CBS. There's the Trump lawsuit against CBS. There's an FCC complaint against CBS, which is about this news distortion matter where they, this conservative group said that basically that CBS, distorted the news by the way they edited an interview with Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes. Then you have the separate Skydance Paramount merger. So two of these things deal with the FCC. The lawsuit is just Trump in his private capacity. So all these things are happening simultaneously. Logically, they're all connected, but they aren't officially connected to some degree. So yes, people were very nervous about the possibility of a settlement. People at CBS, the optics are obviously not great. I mean, ABC took a big reputational hit for settling. For them, what they paid $16 million to settle the case was not a big deal, but reputation is obviously hugely important in media and having credibility. And I think it made the journalists look a little bit weaker, and it sort of hurt their ability to cover strongly independently. So you have a lot of different parties with a lot of different interests. The journalists obviously do not want to settle the case. But, as James said, there's powerful interests that want to make money. In this deal, Sherry Redstone, wants to get rid of Paramount. And so she wants this deal to go through. And they don't actually know for sure that if they settle this deal, that means the merger would be approved, but it obviously wouldn't hurt.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing that insight on your reporting. And thank you for joining us.
Sure.
When we come back, confirmations keep churning out of the Senate. So we're going to talk about what that means and specifically what it means for Senate Republicans who have had problems with some of the nominees, but overall have let them go through in their Senate vote. So return back with us and we'll discuss that more. Senate Republicans continue to push through with cabinet confirmations. There are now 15 out of 22 nominees who have been confirmed to President Trump's cabinet. There may be 16, actually, by the end of this week. The most controversial of the nominees, Tulsi Gabbard, she was confirmed yesterday, also sworn in pretty quickly after that. And moments ago, RFK Jr. Was confirmed in the Senate. So he will now be sworn in as HHS Secretary. Kash Patel was in, his nomination was in Senate Judiciary earlier today, but that left committee. It was a party line vote. So we're seeing, all of these folks who, when they were first named, people questioned, including Republicans. They questioned the nominations, but they seem to just sail through at this point. JM, what do you make of Republicans who have said, I was troubled about RFK Jr., or I was troubled about Gabbard, but they end up voting for them?
I think what we're seeing is an ongoing, fealty to Trump and a loyalty test. It is remarkable that we're going to get to a situation here where seemingly every controversial nomination is going to go through, and the only one who will have not gone through or have not gone to a committee was Matt Gaetz back at the end of last year.
You do have to wonder if he had stuck it out.
At this rate, right? There's always an equation of kind of where you use your political capital if you're a senator in these sort of situations. And, you mentioned RFK, Bill Cassidy, chairman of that committee that voted out RFK, up for re-election in 2026. Susan Collins, Normia Swings vote, up for re-election in 2026. Tom Tillis, also someone who was looked at as someone who might vote against some of these nominations, up for re-election in 2026. So I think that there's a political calculation going on here by the senators who might be inclined to vote against some of these nominees. But I also think you're seeing Trump and his allies really put their thumb on the scale to get his people through.
And the one exception is Mitch McConnell, right? So you mentioned everyone who's in cycle. Mitch McConnell not running for re-election when he's up next year, leaving the Senate, no longer majority leader. And so he is very much operating by this idea of YOLO, you'll be remembered for the last thing you'll do. And he has put out two very strongly worded statements against Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. RFK Jr. is especially striking. He refused to even meet with him because he was a childhood polio survivor, actually still struggles with some of the after effects of polio, and saying in a statement, "I will not condone the relitigation of proven cures, and neither will millions of Americans who credit their survival and quality of life to scientific miracles. And the statement that he put out yesterday on Tulsi Gabbard was also very damning, entrusting the coordination of the intelligence community to someone who struggles to acknowledge basic facts is an unnecessary risk. So is empowering a DNI who only acknowledged the value of critical intelligence collection authorities once her nomination appeared in jeopardy. But it is pretty amazing, because I will say both RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard were Democrats until last year. Both of them would be at home in Dennis Kucinich's cabinet. And here you have the most conservative senators all lining up to vote for him. And I'll say on Cassidy, he put out a statement, basically, he gave a floor speech last week detailing all these private commitments that he says he got from Kennedy, some of which are aimed at protecting federal vaccine oversight, including regular meetings, preserving statements on the CDC website, saying there's no link between vaccines and autism, and allowing Cassidy to choose a representative on any panel that's formed to review vaccine safety.
Yeah, I want to get you in on that too about Mitch McConnell, JM. It is striking that he led the Senate Republicans for a long time. He set the agenda, and now he's almost this swing vote, this independent thinker, which, if you have watched the career of Mitch McConnell, it would seem surprising that he's saying the things that James mentioned. And I will also say he voted against the Hegseth confirmation to the point where it was a tie and J.D. Vance had to drive up to the Hill and tie break. What are you making of Mitch McConnell in this moment?
I don't think he's gone full kind of Mitt Romney at this point from the last Congress, but he is kind of flirting with this idea of being a free agent in a sense, right? At a minimum, he's freed. I mean, you pointed out off camera, Rhonda, that when you're leading the conference, that's a little bit of a different role than when you're just an individual senator voting. And not only that, an individual senator, as James points out, who's retiring. So he's got a lot of leeway on this.
And let's not forget the history too. I mean, Donald Trump has said disgusting, racist, vile things about Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, who was Trump's Secretary of Transportation during the first term and resigned after January 6th. That is not lost on the leader. So he's liberated now because he's no longer in this position where he has to sort of take one for the team.
And the other thing is, on these votes, McConnell is often voting for cloture, which is to close debate to get them to a vote so Democrats can't filibuster these things endlessly. They can go on the floor and do these talkathons, but it's a matter of hours until there's a final vote. So McConnell is voicing his dissent when they get to a final vote, but at that point, in many ways, sort of a foregone conclusion, because they've already voted to close off debate. And if they were to do that, they're likely voting, in this case, the Republicans, they're likely voting to do that. The other thing I'll note is that we are in a situation here where it's a simple majority needed. That goes back to those kind of Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell Senate procedure battles from a decade plus ago. But McConnell's the one who changed the rules to make it a simple majority for nominees on this. So this is, there's just irony at various levels here. And you were also, we could do a whole episode, as you were saying, on Mitch McConnell.
We may.
We should.
So those who
I love that.
That may be a topic soon to dive a little into this, because it certainly is very interesting to see these shifts, to see these political calculations play out the way they are in the confirmations. I want to play a clip because you mentioned Democrats, so we will talk about them now. So let's play a clip of one Democrat from this morning in Senate Judiciary who was challenging the vote to move the Patel nomination out of that committee and onto the Senate floor.
Mark my words. This Patel guy will come back to haunt you. Every piece of evidence shows that, and it is not Democrat evidence. It's his own words, it's his own colleagues, and it's judges evaluating his credibility. And Trump Russia is going to come roaring back if it's not already back.
So that was Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat on Senate Judiciary. And the Democrats who followed him pretty much made the same statements. And what stood out to me is how emphatic he was. And it feels like that's what we're seeing a lot from Democrats right now on the Hill, is that they really don't have many choices or tools other than speaking out against it, speaking, on the Senate floor yesterday when the RFK Jr. vote came up. They talked about it all night and ran the clock out, and the vote was this morning. So they're doing everything that they can in their playbook, but you're also seeing the frustration that they can only go so far too.
There's a lot of talk in the political world of what are Democrats going to do? What are you going to do to hold Trump and Republicans to account? And these sorts of moments are a reminder that they are very powerless, especially in these nomination fights when Republicans stick together. They have a majority. They only need a simple majority to get these through. So the rhetoric is really their tool in the toolbox. Now, I will say that there's some more nominations to get through here, but then we are going to move into kind of a different phase, if you will, here when it comes to the shutdown fight coming up, the debt ceiling fight coming up, the tax bill fight coming up. And Democrats are going to have potentially a little more leverage, if only because the majorities for the Republicans are so narrow, especially in the House. So this is sort of gearing up in that sense, but I also think it's a recognition of how little power and authority they have in these nomination fights.
Yeah, that's right. James, what's your thoughts?
Honestly, I am shocked that more Republicans haven't opposed Kash Patel. In the first term, he was at loggerheads with many of his colleagues. Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general, who's heavily respected among many Senate Republicans, he said that he would hire Kash as the deputy FBI director below where he is going to be over his dead body. Gina Haspel, Trump's CIA director, threatened to resign if Trump installed him at CIA. John Bolton and his deputy, Charles Kupperman, have spoken publicly very critically about Patel. They've accused him of being a fabulist who exaggerates his own record and what he worked on, his work on the Benghazi investigation when he was a prosecutor. And he's someone who has literally like hundreds or thousands of hours of appearances on podcasts, on tapes. And he has said a lot of things like, we're going to crush the deep state and the FBI is the haven of the deep state. And we're going to close down the FBI headquarters and move it out of DC, something he really hasn't backed away from. And he basically is coming in saying, I mean, he tried to sound reasonable during this confirmation hearing, but he hasn't ruled out investigating Chris Wray, the former Trump appointed FBI director. He hasn't ruled out going after the president's enemies. He said he won't be political, but he's left the door wide open, given himself lots of wiggle room. So I honestly am surprised that there hasn't been more Republican resistance. And I think it is honestly, guys, because they're scared. I mean, I think that their Republican senators know if it was a secret ballot, we've said this about other nominees, Kash Patel would definitely fail. And they're afraid of pissing off the Steve Bannon, MAGA wing of the party. And obviously they want to be generally deferential to the president. But I think that's where that tape we showed of Sheldon Whitehouse is coming from, because these Sheldon Whitehouse is like, you guys are going to regret this. Like this guy is not Chris Wray. And, I think White House will probably be proven right on that.
We're really seeing Trump's grip on the party play out in real time here. That's what, because when we say these are controversial nominees, Kash Patel's talked about criminally investigating dozens of people. He's floated those names out. When we talk about Tulsi Gabbard, right, she has floated Russian propaganda out there as if it's an organic original talking point, right? When we talk about Hegseth, it's these management of these past nonprofits that he oversaw. When we talk about RFK, it's the conspiracies and it's double talk on these things like vaccine safety, which is really not in question, right? So that's what we mean when we say this stuff is controversial, and it's surprising that some of these folks are getting through, but I really do think it's a manifestation of Trump just consolidating power within the party.
Yeah, and when it comes to Democrats, I noticed something yesterday that I've never really seen when confirmations are up in the Senate. I saw House members, Democratic House members, get together. They had a press conference yesterday on the Hill calling on senators not to vote for Patel, vote his nomination out of committee, which is, of course, that first steps to a confirmation. It was led by Glenn Ivey, who's of Maryland. He probably represents a lot of federal workers, as well as, where the FBI...
The new headquarters is going to be in Green Bay.
Right. So he was leading the way way. And they all wrote a letter to the Senate calling for senators not to vote on, not to approve the nomination. And one line in the letter that they sent stood out to me because they were saying, he's on record, as you both have been saying, saying that he will go forward with a retribution plan for Trump. He has the government gangsters list of people he wants to go up against. But if he uses the Bureau's resources for that, then there may be terrorist plots, domestic terrorism or other things that, are missed because they're working on, righting perceived wrongs. So I wonder why that is something that isn't, breaking through with Republicans. If that is a concern, and it sounds like a concern to most citizens, why that type of thing isn't breaking through to Republicans?
I think that we are seeing some parallels to Trump 1.0, the first term, which is you had a lot of Republicans during Trump's first term sort of poo-poo various things that he was doing that were norm breaking or outside of the normal realm of what we've deemed kind of acceptable, and saying, well, how bad is it going to get? They can go and do this or that and occupy themselves. And I think there's a little bit of that similar mindset in addition to the fear and loyalty component going on here, where they might, I think James is exactly right. If this were a secret ballot, these folks would fail, but they are not willing to, figuratively walk the plank, if you will, and put their neck on the line for voting down some of these folks, especially if it's going to mean a potential primary challenge in their reelection. Elon Musk has floated that. Donald Trump Jr. has floated that in terms of primary challenges to folks not sufficiently loyal to Trump's agenda. I don't think that it's that much more complicated than that. I think that there's a political calculation going on here by these Republicans. And I also think there's a political calculation going where they are like, we can conduct oversight. They can go in. Kash Patel can run the FBI. We can conduct oversight, and we can use our political capital to get carve outs that we want in this upcoming tax bill, right? Which is something where they do have more leverage just from a starting point standpoint on than they do maybe on some of these nominations. And they can probably have at least a little more impact as opposed to kind of throwing away figuratively their political capital.
Yeah. One last thing I want to get you guys on is I mentioned that there have been 15 who have been confirmed so far out of 22 cabinet level positions. What are you seeing any themes from the people who are in their jobs right now? Pete Hegseth, Pam Bondi. Are there anything we're seeing from them about how they're hitting the ground running?
They're being aggressive and bold. They're trying to show a lot of just activity and energy. There's a flurry of muzzle velocity, as they call it. Pam Bondi had her first news conference on Wednesday as Attorney General and announced civil suits against New York officials for being sanctuary jurisdictions. They also filed a case last week against Chicago, basically for refusing to turn over undocumented immigrants. It was very harsh language. She was there with an angel mom, a woman from Maryland whose daughter was killed by an undocumented immigrant. And you are seeing these people, once they get confirmed, move very aggressively. Kristi Noem, who is now DHS secretary, has asked the Treasury Department to detail IRS agents to help with border enforcement. And a lot of these cabinet folks, once they've been approved, have really been opening the doors for the DOJ folks to come into their agencies and look for what are going to turn out to be very large workforce cuts.
JM, James, thank you so much for going over all of this news of this week. And for our listeners and viewers, you can catch us on Tuesday, where we will likely have more to talk about. I'm Rhonda Colvin with the Washington Post. Have a great day.